Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're heading way back, late Cretaceous period. We're going to get to grips with a dinosaur that's, well, it's both fascinating and a bit of a puzzle, Anasazisaurus.
Hmm.
Our main source today is essentially a detailed Wikipedia entry. But that entry itself pulls together lots of paleontological research, so it's a good starting point.
Absolutely. It gives us a snapshot of what's known and, importantly, what's still debated.
Right. So think of this as your sort of quick guide to understanding this Anasazi lizard, what the science says now, and maybe where the questions still lie.
Exactly. Our mission, really, is to dig into the story of Anasazisaurus.
Yeah.
How was it found? Where does it sit in that huge dinosaur family tree? What was its world like?
And the debates around it, too.
Oh, definitely. We'll touch on the lively scientific discussions about whether it's even its own distinct thing, its own genus. It's a great case study, actually.
A case study in how science works.
Yeah, how our picture of the past is always being, adjusted based on new finds, new interpretations. Pretty dynamic.
Okay, let's dive in then. First things first, that name. It looks like a bit of a tongue twister. How do we actually say it?
Yes, it's generally pronounced AhnsaHcsorois.
Aanathsrr. Got it. Thanks.
Yep. Says on to St.
And the name itself, Anasazi lizard. There's some history packed in there, isn't there?
There is. The genus name Anasazisaurus was coined back in '93 by Adrian Hunt and Spencer G. Lucas.
Okay.
The Anasazi part, well, it refers to a term historically used for the ancestral Pueblo people.
Mm.
And Sauros, that's just Greek for lizard, as you said.
And the link is the location.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The fossils were found pretty close to significant ancestral Puebloan sites, like over in Chaco Canyon. So there's that geographical connection.
But you mentioned historically used. There's a bit more nuance to the word Anasazi itself.
Yes, and that's a really important point to make.
Yeah.
The term Anasazi, it actually comes from the Navajo language.
Right.
And it means something like enemy ancestors. So while it was adopted in archaeology for a long time, its original meaning is quite different, potentially problematic.
Mm.
It sort of highlights a broader issue,
Mm.
how names chosen in the past can carry baggage we might not intend today. There's definitely a move towards more culturally sensitive naming in science now.
That definitely adds another layer. Okay, so moving on from the name's origins. When was this dinosaur around and where?
Right, so Clazosaurus lived during the Late Cretaceous period. We're talking about 74 million years ago, give or take.
Okay, late Cretaceous.
And its fossils, they've all come from one place. The Farmington member of the Kirtland Formation. That's the San Juan Basin, New Mexico in the U.S.
And that formation is pretty well known for fossils.
Oh, yeah, it's a really rich source for fossils from that specific slice of time, a real window into that ecosystem.
And who's the species named after? Anasazisaurus horneri, you said.
Yes, Hornery. That's in honor of the paleontologist Jack Horner, a very influential figure in the field.
Ah, Jack Horn.
Yeah. And interestingly, it was Horner himself who actually first described the skull back in 1992.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but he didn't call it Anasazisaurus. He put it under a different name initially.
Okay.
And that leads us straight into probably the most debated thing about Anasazisaurus, how it's classified.
Right, the dinosaur family tree. It sounds like untangling it can get complicated, especially with incomplete fossils.
Mm-hmm.
So Horner originally thought this skull belonged to Cretasaurus,
Mm-hmm.
Cretasaurus navajovius.
That's exactly right. But then, just a year later, in '93, Hunt and Lucas looked at it again. They proposed this new genus, Anasazisaurus.
Why? What was their reasoning?
Well, their main point was about the original Cretasaurus specimen, the holotype, the one fossil that defines the whole genus. They argued it just wasn't diagnostic enough, meaning it was too incomplete, basically. It didn't have enough clear, unique features to confidently say, okay, this other fossil, like the New Mexico skull, definitely belongs in the same genus.
Yeah.
They felt Cretasaurus was what's called a nomen dubium.
A doubtful name.
Yeah, essentially. Because the defining specimen is too vague. So they argued the New Mexico skull was different enough and distinct enough to need its own genus, Anasazisaurus.
Okay, that makes sense, but I'm guessing that wasn't the final word. Science rarely works like that.
You guessed right. Not everyone agreed. Several paleontologists pushed back. Thomas Williamson is probably the most prominent name there.
And what was his take?
Williamson argued that, no, this skull should stay within Cretasaurus. He thought it was different enough to be its own species, so Cretasaurus horneri, but not different enough for a whole new genus.
So keep it in the family, just give it its own branch.
Kinda, yeah. He published papers laying out his reasoning, focusing on the specific anatomical details he thought linked it closely to Cretaceous.
So it really boils down to interpretation, doesn't it? How significant are these subtle differences in bones that are millions of years old?
Precisely. Are the differences enough to say new genus, or are they just variations within an existing one, like different species? It's about where you draw the line based on the available evidence.
And that evidence is often limited.
Exactly. And this kind of back and forth, this debate,
Yeah.
it's totally normal. It's how the science moves forward, how ideas get tested and refined.
So what about more recent work? Has that settled anything?
Well, settled might be too strong a word. Alberto Prieto Marquez, in a 2014 study, actually supported Williamson's view, classifying it as Cretaceous horneri.
Okay.
His analysis suggested, yes, it's distinct from Cretaceous novojovius, but still belongs in that genus. And that view has been picked up in some later papers.
Any other perspectives?
There was one phylogenetic study that's a study looking at evolutionary relationships that placed it in a group called the Saurophini tribe.
Within the Hadrosauurs.
Yeah, a specific subgroup. But interestingly, that particular study didn't actually include the original Cretaceous novojovius material in its comparison. So it adds another piece to the puzzle, but doesn't directly resolve the Cretaceous versus Anasazisaurus question.
Man, it really is like trying to piece together a family tree with missing photos and maybe some conflicting birth certificates. So where does that leave us right now? What's the current consensus, if there is one?
It's still a bit murky, honestly. The most recent review mentioned in our source material does recognize Anasazisaurus as a distinct genus.
Okay, so leaning towards Hunt and Lucas.
For now, perhaps. But it also notes that its exact placement beyond just being in the broader Hadrosaurini subfamily isn't definitively pinned down.
So still some uncertainty.
Definitely. It really just highlights how paleontology works. New fossils, or even just new ways of looking at old fossils, can shift our understanding. The classification is, fluid.
It's incredible that one skull can spark so much discussion over decades. Let's talk about that skull then, the actual physical evidence. What do we know about Anasazisaurus' appearance from it?
Okay, so yeah, everything we know comes from this one partial skull. Its catalog number is BYU 100-950, and it's kept at Brigham Young University. It was found back in the late 1970s.
And you said partial. How well preserved is it?
The source says somewhat poorly preserved, which is pretty common for fossils, unfortunately.
What's missing?
Some key parts are gone. We don't have the lower jaw at all, or the beak part at the very front of the snout. And also the quadrate bone is missing, which is important for the jaw joint.
So, significant gaps.
Yeah, but on the bright side, it was apparently only fully prepared relatively recently, meaning scientists cleaned it up and got a really good look at all the remaining details not too long ago.
Okay. So even with missing bits, is there anything that really stands out? Anything distinctive?
Oh, yes. There's one feature that's really the key identifier for Anasazisaurus. It gets this short nasal crest.
A crest, like on Parasaurolophus?
Not quite like that. It's much shorter, and it's not hollow. It's described as a flange.
Yeah.
Like a ridge or lip of bone coming up from the nasal bone.
Where exactly?
It rises up between the eyes and maybe slightly above them, and then it sort of folds back on itself. It's quite unique in its shape.
And that's what separates it from related hadrosaurs, like Rhiposaurus.
Exactly. Rhiposaurus has more of an arched hump on its nose, made from the nasals too, but it's a different shape. This fold-over crest is the Anasazisaurus signature. Oh, and the top surface of the crest is apparently kind of roughened.
Interesting. So this relatively small bony structure is the linchpin for telling it apart. How big was the whole skull, even in its incomplete state?
The maximum preserved length they measured is about 90 centimeters.
Okay, so around 35 inches. That's still a pretty big head.
It is. It definitely indicates a fairly large animal overall.
And based on that skull size, have people tried to estimate the size of the whole dinosaur?
Yep. Gregory S. Paul, who's well known for his dinosaur size estimates, suggested a total body length of about 7.5 meters.
7.5 meters, so what, around 25 feet?
Yeah, roughly 25 feet. And he estimated its weight at possibly up to 2,500 kilograms.
Which is?
About 2.75 U.S. tons. So, a substantial herbivore. Definitely not small.
Certainly not. Okay, so we have this large crest-bearing hadrosaur. Let's think about its life. We know it's a Saurophine hadrosaurid, a duckbill. What does that classification tell us about how it lived?
Well, being a Saurophine means it's in that group of hadrosaurs that didn't have the big hollow crests. Think Edmontosaurus or Gryposaurus rather than Parasaurolophus or Cretaceous.
Gotcha. And as an ornithopod, a hadrosaur, it ate plants, right?
Absolutely. A large herbivore. likely capable of moving on both 2 legs and 4, depending on what it was doing. And we can tell a lot about how it ate from the skull, even the incomplete one.
The duckbill name always makes me picture them scooping things up. How did they actually eat?
They had these really sophisticated skulls, incredibly well adapted for processing tough plant material. At the front, they had a wide, toothless beak, probably covered in keratin, good for cropping off vegetation.
Okay.
But the real action was further back. They had hundreds of teeth packed tightly together into what we call dental batteries. Yeah, rows upon rows of teeth, with new ones constantly growing underneath to replace the ones that wore down. This created these large, rasping surfaces.
For grinding.
Exactly. The skull structure allowed for a complex motion, kind of analogous to chewing, that could really break down fibrous plants. Plus, they had muscular cheeks to keep the food from falling out while they processed it. It was a very efficient system.
Wow. Okay, so not just simple teeth, but like built-in food processors.
All right, pretty much. A real advantage for tackling the kinds of plants available back then.
So what kind of plants are we talking about? What was on the menu?
Based on its size and being a hadrosaur, it was likely a generalist herbivore. It could probably reach vegetation from ground level up to maybe 4 meters, or about 13 feet high.
So browsing and grazing.
Yeah, ferns, cycads, maybe conifers, flowering plants, whatever was abundant in that late Cretaceous environment. It could access a good range of plant life.
And what was that environment like? Who else lived there? You mentioned the Kirtland Formation was rich in fossils.
Oh, it was a diverse place. Anasazisaurus shared its home 74 million years ago in New Mexico with a whole bunch of other dinosaurs.
Such as?
So there was Bisterosaur, an early relative of T-Rex.
A predator, then.
Definitely.
Huh.
And potentially Cretasaurus itself, if you consider them separate but coexisting.
Right, depending on the classification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then you had the very famous Parasaurolophus with that long, trombone-like crest, the bighorn dinosaur Pentaceratops, armored dinosaurs like Nodocephalosaurus and Zeopelta,
Oh, wow.
and smaller predators too, like the Raptorosaur and Niflestes. It really paints a picture of a thriving, complex ecosystem, a real dinosaur hotspot.
Sounds like quite the neighborhood. Okay, let's try to pull all this together. If we're summarizing our deep dive on Anasazisaurus, what are the main takeaways?
Okay, key points. Anasazisaurus was a large duck-billed dinosaur, a Hadrosaurid, from Late Cretaceous, New Mexico, about 74 million years ago.
Characterized by that unique, short, nasal crest.
Right, that's its main distinguishing feature. Its classification is complicated and debated. Is it its own genus, Anasazisaurus, or a species of Cretasaurus? That's still discussed.
And our knowledge is based on just one partial skull.
Correct, which means there's still a lot we don't know for sure, but that skull tells us it was a big herbivore, likely well adapted for eating plants, living in a very diverse prehistoric environment.
Okay. And that brings us, as always, to a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Considering this whole debate, Anasazisaurus genus versus Cretasaurus species, what does that make you think about the challenges involved here? You know, trying to read the story told by often incomplete fossils.
Yeah, what does it reveal about how science actually works, that process of discovery, debate, revision?
And maybe think about what it would take to settle the question. What kind of fossil discoveries might finally help clarify where Anasazisaurus really fits in that huge, complex dinosaur family tree?
It's a good reminder, isn't it? Even with all we know, the story of life on Earth is constantly being uncovered and rewritten. There's always more to find out.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Anasazisaurus.